Hello and welcome. I'm Maria from Sew Through Time, and this time we're making a Regency Bridgerton inspired ball gown. When I first saw the season 1 of Bridgerton last year, I immediately fell in love with the whimsical Regency inspired costuming that they had going on. And I made that year a day gown inspired by Daphne, but I decided, because I do mostly historical costuming, to make it more accurate. But this time watching season 2, I wanted to make something a bit more whimsical and, well, fancy. A ball gown. And not where historical accuracy wouldn't be such a huge concern. Something just for fun. And I found this amazing curtain. It was a silk curtain that had a gauze overlay with embroidery on it, and I immediately knew that I wanted to use this to make my ball gown. But the silk that it came with was this golden silk, and I wasn't sure if I wanted the actual ball gown to be golden, or if I wanted to go with the pink I had in my stash, or maybe with some blue or turquoise or something else bright and cheerful and whimsical. So I decided to make them into separate things, like an overgown that is made out of the gauze, and then an undergown that went underneath it. And this is actually historically accurate. You could have petticoats or underdresses that would be visible from underneath the sheer overlay gowns. They could be like a sheer muslin type of thing, or they could be an actual sheer gauze that was completely see-through, like this one. Now, even though historical accuracy was not really a big concern when it came to this project, I still wanted my pattern to be historically plausible or accurate. So what I decided to do was, because I've made Regency gowns before, but most of them have a front closure, except for that day gown that I made last year that has a back closure. But that closes with hooks and eyes, and I wanted to do something a little different this time. So I decided to go for a drawstring closure. These are very common in the era, and they could be just at the bottom or both bottom and top, and they could be drawn all the way around, or more commonly, just the back actually draws. And if there is gathering in the front, that is done with a separate sewn-in drawstring usually. And they don't necessarily have anything in between the upper and the lower drawstrings. It's just open because the gathering itself keeps it closed and looking nice and not showing bare skin or stays from underneath. Now, as for other design elements, the thing that I really kind of deviated from historical accuracy with this project was that because the gauze that I'm using, it has a pretty lace edge to it, and I wanted to use that as my sleeve edge. And I decided to leave, because I was using that edge, I decided to just leave it open instead of puffing it out like Regency sleeves in this era would have for real beat. If you're interested in more detailed information about what Regency fashion was like and how it changed throughout this era, I have a video. I'll link it up above. It's not super detailed, but it goes through the timeline and gives you an idea of the general fashion. But as for sleeves, in Regency era, the type of sleeves really that there are narrow sleeves, either short or long, or puffed sleeves. There aren't really these big capped sleeves that are very common in Bridgerton. But other than that, I used my machine for the long seams on the underdress. But other than that, the construction methods I'm using are plausible for the era. I'm not sure about how a really gauzy gown like this would have been constructed, because I know that the sheer gowns usually were made with a mantua maker's seam. that is a seam similar to a French seam that holds in the raw edges and finishes long seam or whatever seam you're sewing all in one stitch. And that is very practical for sheer gowns, but I didn't really like the look on it with this gauze because this is not just sheer, it's completely see-through. So I decided to use a different method. I am not sure if this would be period accurate, but it would be period plausible at least, because I do know that whip stitch was used to construct things. With that being said, let's get to it.
For my pattern base, I'm using Laughing Moon 126, which is a front bib style. I'm just changing it into a back style and altering the neckline a little bit. To make a gown, a back gathering gown, you basically just lengthen the back piece at the center back a couple of inches to allow for gathering. And then I cut out the silk for my sleeveless undergown. To mimic the mantua maker's seam, I start by machine sewing the long seam, and then I hand sew it, encasing the raw edge. The bodice is constructed with actual mantua maker's seams. After constructing separately the bodice and the skirt is attached to the bodice with a back stitch with some gathering at the skirt portion at the back to match the circumference of the bodice. Then I sew on a linen tape, enclosing the raw edges and forming a casing for the drawstring. The shoulder straps are the only part of the underdress that get a lining. I attach the lining to the bodice with a back stitch at both ends, making sure that the strap is nice and level and even. And then the shoulder strap fashion fabric gets hemmed on. For the overgown, I use the same technique to change it into a back gathering gown, but my pattern is from the Regency Women's Dress Techniques and Patterns by Cassidy Percoco. For the sleeves, I used the Laughing Moon pattern as my template, but as you can see, I didn't really follow it. All the seams on the overgown are whipped together to ensure that the seams are as invisible as possible. The sleeves are gathered with a rolled whip stitch, and then they are whipped onto the gown. The upper and lower edge of the bodice are turned over twice, making a casing for the drawstring and then whipped closed. The skirt portion is just a straight piece of fabric that is gathered in the back and whipped onto the bodice. And here they are, the finished gowns worn together. I'm quite happy with how it turned out, though I would personally prefer that the back started a little higher, so that's probably something that I would fix for next time if I were to do this again. And also, the hem of the underskirt is a teensy tiny bit too long, so I think I'll rehem that at some point. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button because it really does help us creators. And don't be shy to share with friends if you found this interesting or useful. I hope to see you again next time. Bye!